Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing what I'm going to be doing in my garden in March. March is one of those months in Ireland where it could be getting gradually warmer and sunnier. However, it could also have the odd frosty cold snap, and it could be getting very wet with lots of rainfall. So we are going to be wanting to control a lot of the conditions that our plants are going to be under. As we get on going into March, we're going to want to tidy up a couple of those early spring flowering bulbs. So deadheading them, cutting back leaves on things like the hellebores, just keeping things tidy so that coming into the spring, your garden is looking fresh. We don't want all these dead leaves and flower heads around. So keeping on top of that is certainly a little job to be doing. Another thing I do in March is to prune back certain plants like roses, summer and autumn flowering clematis, and things like dogwood and willows if I haven't already done it in the autumn. We can also prune back things like gooseberries and buddleias. Early spring is a good time to get those shrubs and bushes really trimmed back. Once we've pruned back some of these shrubs and bushes, we want to mulch them to give them a bit of a feed and a boost for the spring. It's also a great time of year to be cutting back and dividing those perennials such as hostas. I tend to do this more in the autumn, but if you haven't done it yet, the early spring is a great time to do it before it starts to come up again. So you can divide these by separating parts of the plant from the mother plant and then potting them on or moving them to different areas. You can do this with numerous perennials and shrubs. As long as they have a root connection, they should be good to go. Talking of hostas in particular, as they start to come up in March, it is really important to try and protect them somewhat from the slugs. Now, slugs absolutely love hostas, and I have had years where my hosta leaves literally looked like lace because the slugs have made an absolute meal of them. Now, I tend to use either eggshells or cinnamon, which tend to work for me. I just put them around the base of where the hosta is coming up to give them a bit of protection. I tend to have so many hostas that not all of them are going to be destroyed by slugs. I didn't have too much of a problem last year, even though it was quite a wet summer. So whether the eggshells and the cinnamon work, it works for me. Let me know in the comments what you use to protect your hostas from slugs or any of your plants from slugs. I've heard all sorts of different techniques and methods that people use over the years. But yeah, cinnamon and eggshells usually work for me. Throughout March, you want to continue to tidy up those flower beds, borders, vegetable patches, all those kinds of areas. Make sure that you try and keep them weed free and ready for when your new seedlings start to come along and are ready to plant outside. I usually give the beds a light hoe just to take off the surface level of weeds and not try and till the earth too much. This means that the soil microbiome stays intact and healthy, which is exactly what we want for our plants. I try and do a no-dig process, adding material onto the top of the surface of the soil. We have a very heavy clay soil in a lot of areas in Ireland, particularly we do here where I am. So adding layers of mulch and layers of compost on top of the clay soil certainly helps my seeds and my plants more than trying to dig into the clay soil. Clay soils tend to have very, very small particles, meaning that they hold a lot of moisture in the soil. Now, in Ireland, we get a lot of rain, which is not always great for the soil either. It can cause compaction, making it difficult to dig into. So no dig works much better for me here with the conditions of the soil I work with. If you're looking to sow flower seeds in March, you're going to want to start with some hardy annuals. So things like nigella, calendula, sweet peas, poppies, snapdragons, honesty, lupins, nasturtiums, marigolds, teasel, things like verbena that need a cold snap just before they germinate will definitely want to be planted in March, early March. I would always suggest maybe planting a few in the beginning of March and then doing another batch a couple of weeks later, and then continue that throughout April and then even May, just to have a continuous flurry of flowers coming into the spring and into the summer. Some of these annuals will obviously flower much later into the season as well, which is fantastic. So you want to keep that rotation of flowers. So don't go planting them all at once if you can help it. Sunflower seeds will need pre-soaking before they're put into any soil, things like lupins and sweet peas. This just breaks down the hard seed layer on the outside of the seed and just makes it easier for them to germinate once they're in the soil. If you're thinking of sowing some vegetable seeds in March, definitely early carrot varieties. You can start tomatoes and peppers and chilies, but they definitely need to stay indoors, preferably under a heated mat or a warm windowsill. They just take a long time to germinate, so need to be planted a little earlier in the season to give them the time to really grow and get a harvest from. You can also plant things like spinach and certain lettuce varieties. Mizuna is always a very good one for a winter salad. It doesn't mind the cold, it doesn't mind the frost, so Mizuna is a really good one for your early spring planting. You can also sow things like parsnips. Again, they take a long time to germinate, so earlier in the season is better than later in the season. Things like French beans, peas, Monchtou, radishes and beetroots can also all be planted in March, although I would tend to leave them more towards late March, just so they don't get too much of a cold snap. March is definitely the month you want to start your early potato crop. So I tend to get either chitting potatoes from the garden centre, or if I have potatoes, usually little ones, left over from dinners that I've not made or from the supermarket, then I tend to leave them in the bottom of the bag in a dark space, and they will start to produce roots. If they do start to produce roots, you can absolutely plant them. Definitely stick them into a bucket with some soil and you will get potatoes. There's no harm in trying. I tend to cut them into smaller pieces that have at least one root coming out of them. And yeah, like, why waste them? You may as well try and grow some of your own. When sowing your seeds in March, it is important to remember to keep a lot of them covered or in warmer areas. So I tend to keep some of mine in the polytunnel, but I do keep a fleece over them, a horticultural fleece, to make sure they're protected from any frost that might affect them in the polytunnel. Keeping them in a greenhouse is better, as the greenhouse will tend to be warmer, or indoors if you can, under a heat mat, or in a warm windowsill. They're early starters, but they still need protecting from those cold temperatures that might come along in March. Even when it comes to sowing seeds outside, you can still use horticultural fleece to protect them. Things like your early carrots and radishes, beetroot, can still be protected with a layer of fleece to make sure that they do survive any frost that comes. You also want to protect any fruit trees like peaches or apricots that might be starting to bloom in early March. You want to protect the blooms particularly from the frost. So I have one in my polytunnel, I have a peach tree in my polytunnel, and I just cover that with a fleece as well. It shouldn't be too badly affected by frost in there, but it's just an extra precautionary layer to protect those blooms to make sure that we get lovely fruit on the peach tree. March is a great time to start getting your summer bulbs in if you haven't already. So getting summer bulbs and any new summer plants that you might want to have in your garden as well. So now that the spring season has kind of come along and you should have had all your spring plants planted by now, we're going to be preparing for the summer as well. So definitely check out websites and good garden centres for any plants that you might want for your summer garden as well. As a gardener, you're trying to constantly think of the next season while working in the current season. So you have continuous display or a continuous supply of beautiful flowers or fruits and vegetables from your garden throughout the year. If you haven't already, March is a good time to be putting a feed or a mulch onto things like brassicas, fruit trees, and blueberries. Now, blueberries will need something a little different as they like acidic soil. I tend to mulch them with pine needles that I pick up from walking my dogs around the local forestry. So just put a layer of those on the pots that I have my blueberries in. But my compost is a great mulch for the other things, fruit trees and brassicas and anything else that might need a bit of a feed coming into the faster growing season. With the warmer month of March coming along, people will be no doubt eager to get their lawn mowed. Now, I don't have a huge amount of grassy area in my garden. It's mostly wood chip now, or paths, so I don't have too much of an issue with that. But I know that people do want to get their lawns looking lovely and lush again for coming into the spring. Now, when it comes to lawns, just be careful and make sure you do it on a dry day. You don't want to compact your soil too much by going over it with a lawn mower when it's wet. And if you can, maybe try and hold it off a little bit longer than you normally would. Let those dandelions come up, as they're going to be the first sort of flowers that the bees are going to be able to get some nectar from. March is also the first month that the bees will really start to come out, and a lot of the pollinators will really start to come out, and you'll start to notice those. So let the dandelions grow a little bit longer if you can, so that the bees can have a good flower to get lots of pollen from. I tend to start doing my bee checks for my hives in March as well. As the temperatures get a little bit higher, I wouldn't check them too much, but just to make sure that they have enough supplies, that they're bringing in pollen. So there's definitely they're definitely out foraging, that they're coming in and out of the hive. And it's also a good time to prepare any equipment that I might need, get new hives prepared, and just keep an eye on them, make sure that they've made it through the winter. I have started to notice them already, that they're coming out and they're foraging, which is great. So I'm looking forward to getting back into the beekeeping. Now, do keep an eye on the fluctuating temperatures that can happen throughout March. You want to try and make sure that any cold weather or cold temperatures don't affect your new seedlings if you've got them in a greenhouse or a polytunnel. That being said, you do still want to ventilate your greenhouse or your polytunnel so that moisture doesn't build up. This is also a good time of the year to clean all your equipment and your tools. So just with hot soapy water, give all your small tools or your hand tools, watering cans, and any of your large tools as well, just a bit of a clean and a once over to prevent spreading any fungal diseases or anything that could affect your plants. Okay, first job in March is to spring clean. Second job would be to prune those bushes and shrubs. Third job would be to divide those perennials. Fourth would be to put in slug protection. Fifth would be to hoe your no-dig beds. Sixth would be to start sowing your flower seeds and to sow your vegetable seeds. You would also need to protect these from frost. Plan your summer planting. Mulch, 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 everything. Start your lawn mowing, but be careful. Do your bee checks. And help prevent any plant diseases by keeping everything clean. I think that's all we need to cover in this month's episode. Let me know in the comments what you're starting to grow this month, and we will catch you next time. Thanks a million.